Do you want to bust your sales quota? Do you want to join the ranks of top 1% sellers? The Top 1% Sellers podcast gives you the insights and the tools to help you achieve your sales greatness. The podcast features sales and services professionals, leaders, and experts to give you the edge you're looking for. Here's your host, Ash Sadiq.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Top 1% Sellers Academy. Today's webinar is with Peter Meyers. Peter Meyers is the founder and president of the Stand and Deliver group. And I'm going to basically also kind of read you very briefly here a little bit of his bio as well. Peter is a communication consultant. He worked with leaders in politics, in business, in sports, and performing arts to achieve greater influence through the spoken word. He is a graduate of the University of Southern California. He lived and studied at the Zen Yoga Arts Institute in New York and trained as a performer with the late Stella Adler and Sanford Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse. He's the former artistic director of the award-winning Vector Theater Company in San Francisco. In founding Stand and Deliver Group, Peter synthesized his experience in sports, in theater, and high-performance psychology, connecting the three disciplines to develop Stand and Deliver's high-performance communication curriculum. With that, I'll go ahead also and show you Peter's book, which is a fantastic read. It's As We Speak, How to Make Your Point and Have It Stick. It's a fantastic book where I think actually Peter kind of gave away all of his secrets in this book. So I very much encourage everyone watching this to grab a copy of the book. Peter, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Ash. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is definitely my pleasure as well. And what we promised people watching in on Facebook and on social media is that we will actually unpack for sales professionals what it takes to present in high-stakes situations. And what I'd love for us to do initially, kind of go through three segments. We'll take a look at how top sellers prepare to deliver an impactful, effective conversation in these high-stakes situations. And then we'll also look at, when it comes to delivery time, what happens. And then we'll come back and say, how do they also follow up after these meetings to make sure they tie all those pieces together and get these deals through the deal process. So with that, my first question to you is, how top sellers, top communicators really get prepared to deliver in these situations?
Well, I think the way people prepare when they truly create results is by following the old adage, which is to know your customer, know the person that you're speaking to. And I think most people know that. But time and time again, you'll see somebody do the homework to find out who the customer is. And then what they do is come in and tell them all about themselves. Let me tell you all about my company. Let me tell you all about my product. Let me tell you about our culture, our values, our history, our founder, and fail to really identify what the customer's needs are. And I would suggest to you that the top sellers today aren't selling. They're having a conversation.
Yes.
They're having an authentic conversation that first and foremost demonstrates that you understand the situation that your customer is in. And the conversation starts with the pronoun you, not I.
Yes. So it's mostly audience-centered, versus being centered on what company belongs to, what products is selling and solution is selling.
It's audience-centered, but it's deeper than that. It's a demonstration of understanding the audience's current challenges. What are the risks that particular customer is facing? What are some of the challenges they're facing? You could look at this in terms of two things. All behavior is driven by two things, and two things only.
Yes. And what are
pain and pleasure.
Yeah.
So where's the pain? What are the difficulties that they may be facing in the industry, in the company, with the particular product? And what are the opportunities that they're going after? What are the hopes, the aspirations, and the goals? And if you can come out of the gate with an assessment of, so we've taken some time to look at your business, Mr. or Mrs. Customer.
Yes.
And what we've discovered is, your industry is rapidly changing. Over the past 6 months, you've merged with 2 other organizations, or you've acquired. And right now, you have a huge opportunity to do X. But some of the challenges that you're facing are Y and Z. So today, we'd like to talk to you about how we can help you reduce that risk, or how we can help you get to market faster, or how we can give you more time, and ideally reduce some of the risk of loss.
Yes.
I haven't said a thing about my product or about my company yet. I'm here to help, which is the essence of good business.
Absolutely. It definitely makes a lot of sense, because you're saying they have to have done that homework to bring it to the table and come in prepared to present it.
Well, again, I see a lot of people do the homework and then go in and say, hi, let me tell you about my company, Stand and Deliver Group, and tell you what we do, how we do it, and how great we are. Here's a few more slides about how we were started, and let me tell you about some of the customers we work with. And it's me. It's sometimes I call it I-itis.
Yes. Absolutely. Now, I know a big part of what you do is you work with a lot of organizations to help them specifically actually kind of think about their messaging. In your mind, then, how much work has to happen in the background to really develop that kind of thinking?
To develop the messaging?
Yes.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about, but probably not as much as you think. I mean, I think you need to understand what your product is and what it does, or your service. And if you've been around the block for more than a few weeks, you probably know the ins and outs of it. But rolling out a slick slogan and a pitch gets picked up within a New York second. We can hear the pitch that you've given 7 times today. So you need to understand what your product or service does and how to tailor that message to the particular situation or the particular needs of that customer.
Yes. And
in my opinion, it shouldn't be slick. It should sound a little rough around the edges. It should sound like you're creating it. You're creating this talk today for this customer for the first time.
Interesting.
And you're finding the right words. Your thoughts are like fresh picked flowers with some of the soil still on the stem there.
Yes.
Not something that's all plastic that you get in the hardware store.
Absolutely, because that definitely sort of is the unconventional wisdom of sorts, because a lot of people like to go in very buttoned up with everything figured out. And what you're saying is really try to come across much more genuinely and authentically than this.
Yeah, be authentic about it. I mean, if I came and I said, so we're Stand and Deliver Group, and what we do is we create influence through the spoken word.
Yeah. 3
of the core things that you just go, people turn off, and I think their antenna is up for this. They can feel it coming. So to what degree are you really listening and having a conversation? And what degree are you pulling the string like one of those dolls and sort of transmitting a pre-recorded message?
Yes. Absolutely true. I wonder, part of, and we had a conversation before, a big part, I think, of what you do, which I love, immensely, is focusing on how presenters and people delivering such high stakes conversations really think about the state that they are in. And when it comes to these meetings, specifically also from your work with other clients, what have you sort of helped them develop to really get better at managing their state? And then maybe just explain also to the audience what we mean by that.
Yeah. So when you think about communication, traditionally, we've focused almost exclusively on the content. Let me get the right words, slides, brochure, whatever it is.
Yes.
And we know that's the right place to start. What are your ideas? How are you tailoring that to the particular listener or client? The second part of communication is delivery. How are you using your body, your voice, your eyes? How are you using these means of delivering the message to shape it and craft it? Sometimes that's called executive presence.
Yes.
All too often, people have great ideas that are never heard because the delivery is flat. But what drives both of these, and the thing that too often gets overlooked, the thing that really creates the experience for the listener, is the psychological and emotional state that you're in when you're communicating.
Yes.
When you think about it, if you're in a lousy state, you're tired, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're tense, nervous, scared, as you go to reach for your own ideas, it's hard to find them. It's like the bandwidth to your brain is compromised. You sometimes you can't even remember your middle name.
Yes.
And then when you go to deliver it, you stutter, you stammer, you look at the floor, you start sweating, your heart is beating, and then if you felt bad before and you look out and they're not with you, they're getting bored, they're getting on their phones, you start to feel worse.
Yes.
And then the content gets worse and the delivery gets worse. You go into a vicious cycle. But if we can manage our state better, and I don't mean just getting over your nerves, if we borrow some of the technology from athletes or from performers who have to bring themselves to an optimum state before they show up on the field or the court. So instead of fear and anger and frustration and fatigue, they have a sense of purpose, a sense of intellectual generosity, a spirit of generosity, a sense of joy or pride in what they're doing,
Yes.
a sense of excitement. If you can bring yourself authentically to that state, it changes the quality of your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So your content gets better. You actually put your words together better.
Yes.
And then your delivery becomes that much more human, becomes warmer. Your voice starts to have lots of different colors in it. Your hands and your feet know what to do. Your eyes know how to connect. And you look out and they're with you. They're asking questions. They're laughing in the right places.
Yes.
And if you were in a good state before, it just got better. So you start to go into what we call a high performance pattern.
Yes.
The interesting thing about that triad is if you think of it like a triangle, if you take out any leg in that triad, the triangle falls down. You need the content for sure.
Yes.
You need the delivery, and you need to be in an optimum state. And that happens before you walk in the room.
I know you also work, one of the things you talk about is this whole idea of points of discovery. And you just covered now the whole idea of state. And I wonder how you then move over with your clients to work with them on how to develop these points of discovery. And I can see from what you just said that excitement is the first component. And then you get to the meat of what you need to cover.
Well, you said it, Ash. It's excitement, but you can't just muster up excitement. Where does excitement come from?
Yes.
Look, I'm here just to transmit my sales pitch. I mean, this is the 6th month I've been at it, and this is the 6th client today. I don't know how much excitement I'm going to have. But if I were truly going to create points of discovery, and I could get behind it, where I'm going to create an experience where my listener or my customer is going to learn something. They're going to gain an insight here. I'm not just going to tell them and sell them.
Yes.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity to begin the consulting process, to bring new ideas to life. They don't have to be Nobel Peace Prize winning, groundbreaking ideas, but how can I make sure that the experiences with me when I'm selling are experiences where people feel like they've grown a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
where I've helped create some certainty where there was doubt.
Yes.
where I can create insight where there's confusion, where I can bring something new to light that they hadn't thought before. I get excited. Most people get excited about that because by nature, human beings get excited about making a difference with somebody else.
Absolutely.
I'm not mustering the excitement. I genuinely have it because, I love helping people. I love making a difference.
Exactly. Very, very good point. And I'd love for us to then kind of move on and define to people the concept of points of discovery, which is embedded in what you just said they need to deliver, and then take them through how they can actually develop those points of discovery.
Yeah. Another way of thinking about points of discovery are, the basic chapters of your story. And the chapters of a story are based on they're based on the experience that you want to create for the other person.
Yes.
So for example, if I'm meeting with the Acme Widget Company, point number one may be, I'm going to share with them what I've learned in the past 6 months about the manufacturing business of widgets and what I know about the challenges and some of the new things that I'm seeing out there, as well as some of the problems.
Yes.
Point number two might be, here are some of the solutions that we can offer that are directly tied to some of those challenges and aspirations. Point number three might be about what the investment is, working with us.
Yes.
What it's going to require on both sides, how we would partner together, whether it's a service or whether it's a product. But I'm going to try to create a trajectory that takes us down into the valley of darkness. Point number one, here's the problem.
Yes.
And I got to be okay with my customer being a little uncomfortable because I'm there to solve a problem, but let's get clear about what the problem is.
Absolutely.
Think about any great movie, any great story, novel, opera. First, we got to have the appearance of a problem that doesn't even look solvable.
Yes.
And then there's the appearance of the hero or the solution or the idea that pulls us out of that. That's my second point. And then third is, what's it going to require for us to actually engage?
Yes.
So I planned a journey, 3 basic points of discovery.
Absolutely, yeah.
That might be a different trajectory. I might say, look, let's talk about the past, let's talk about the present, and let's talk about the future. 3 points of discoveries. But I'm trying to structure my ideas around some kind of a triad that helps me organize my thoughts.
Yes.
More importantly, gives the listener a structure that they can follow.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can see as you're talking, if somebody is sort of used to using, software tools, PowerPoint, Keynote, and other tools, that it's very important for them to understand first what those points of discovery are and how sort of these tools will actually act as a supporting tool versus being, the end all for their talk, and may actually free them completely from having to depend on one of these tools.
Yeah, I mean, you have to ask whether the tool is helping anybody.
Exactly, yeah.
The title of my book is As We Speak.
Yes.
It's by Simon & Schuster. But the title that we sent to Simon & Schuster first was Nobody Wants to Hear Your Pitch. That was the title. They didn't like that title, but I said I wrote the book based on the idea that nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I can't wait to hear so-and-so's presentation.
Yes.
Most people don't want to listen. So you got to give them a reason to listen. And if you can't do that, if you can't create an experience of delight, of learning, of growing, of insight, then they're going to cut you off. They're going to cut the meeting short. They're going to interrupt you. They're going to hit you with hard questions.
Yes.
They're going to come up with the objections. You'll never get through your story. So all stories, all pitches have to be some kind of a roller coaster that brings surprise, delight, fear, joy, but they've got to go, I liked that story. I liked listening to you.
Yes, absolutely. And if we go back to the concept of high stakes, when you think about the points of discovery and that thought process, and that, there's a lot at stake, not just for the person that's selling, but also for everybody that's listening to that conversation. do you think that has a bearing on how much they need to prepare, or how they need to think about their points of discovery?
Of course, but the preparation has to be based on one key question, and it's this: what do they need to know in order for me to achieve my outcome? That seems simple enough, but most people aren't asking that question. They're asking, what do I want to tell them? What's the difference? What do they need to know versus what I want to tell them? The number one reason people say they stop listening to somebody else is that the person talks too much. Well, if you're asking, what do I want to tell them? You're going to fall into that trap every time. And if you're an extrovert, you don't need to just be an extrovert, but especially if you're an extrovert,
yes,
you talk in order to think. That's how you think. You think out loud, but you're thinking out loud on somebody else's time. It's as if you're saying, here,
yes,
follow me through the forest of my mind, and you try to make sense of it.
yes.
But you have a responsibility to the listener to say, let me see if I can plan this journey ahead based on what their needs are.
Absolutely, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense to me, and I know it's a lot of work for anybody who's thinking about these meetings to do that. And then it gets more complicated when you are trying to deliver a lot of that by partnering with a number of other players from the same company you're coming from.
Well, let me challenge you a little. Sorry to interrupt, Ash.
Sure.
I don't think it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think it's actually pretty easy.
Okay.
I think it's just a question of asking a different question. If it's too much work, people won't do it. But if you just stop, and whether it's talking to your spouse or your kids or your customer or your colleague, and go, what do they need to know right now?
Yes.
What is the experience they have to have? You'll find that in most situations, it'll take you about 30 seconds to come up with 2 or 3 things that they need to know. It's not that much work. It's just that we avoid the question and fall into being autobiographical. What do I want to talk about in terms of my needs? Listen, for anybody that's listening, I challenge you right now to look at your sent emails.
Yes.
If you're not sure about this concept, and look at the first word in the first sentence, and you're going to find the word I. But don't stop there. Look at the second sentence. You'll find the word I. I want, I need, will you do me a favor? And we tend to have the same language that we had when we were little kids in the grocery basket with our parents. Mama, I want, I need, I want, I need, I want. What a great seller does, somebody who really understands how to sell, is let me see if we can talk about your situation and see if I understand it right, and perhaps I can help you.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like us, before we get into the second segment that's talking more about the delivery piece, if you can maybe just talk to the people listening in about when you do this work with groups and corporations, how does it typically, the engagement sort of look like? Where do you start with them, and then how do you move forward?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So how do we work with organizations? A team will come to us and say, look, we've got a new product, or we've got a new team, or we just have a team and a product, and we need to get to the next level. But we're not speaking with one voice. We want to raise our ability to truly engage the customer, especially if it's a complex sale, like in technology, where it's not just going to be a single pitch. And what we'll do is we'll work with an entire team, and that team can be, it can be 10 people, it can be 1,000 people.
Yes.
We'll take them through a 2-day program called Speak to Inspire. And it's all about developing a methodology for putting together that narrative, those 3 points of discovery.
Yes.
It's all about, and then we move on to the delivery part, where it's all about developing the presence and the confidence. And the third part is managing your state.
Yes.
Really being deliberate about it, and instead of being a victim of the circumstance and getting taken hostage by your own fear or anxiety, and let's face it, we all feel that tightening of the throat. Instead of falling victim to that, it's about applying the same technology that somebody like Roger Federer uses before he gets on the court.
Yes.
Any athlete, whether it's football or tennis, but how do you manage your mindset so that you're showing up and there's light in your eyes?
Yes.
Excitement doesn't mean the butterflies go away. If you're in a high stakes situation, The butterflies are good. If you don't get butterflies, you shouldn't walk in the room. You should go to the hospital because there's something wrong with you.
Absolutely.
You want to figure out how to turn what used to be anxiety into performance energy.
Very interesting. And this is a beautiful segment for us to start talking more about the delivery piece of high stakes presentations and conversations. And I know in some of your work, you also talk about nonverbal communications. You talk about the quality of the voice. So maybe let's sort of delve into that, and then say, you've got all this, easy work done, as you said, if they really think about what they need to hear versus what they need to tell them. And then now you are coming in to actually deliver it. Maybe we start with the things that typically a lot of speakers do wrong. And maybe we start there, which would help us also uncover what the right things to do are.
Yeah. Well, this is based on research. The 3, 4, 5 things that people do that makes the listener either disconnect or discredits the speaker are the following. Number 1 is their voice tends to go flat and go monotone. They're not monotone, but they go monotone.
Yes.
Secondly, they're incongruent. Their body is doing one thing and their words are saying another. And let me see if I can get if I cross my arms and say, listen, I really want to open up and share some of my thoughts with you, which do you believe? We listen to the body first. We are highly trained to listen to the body language first. You don't actually have to go to school or read a book. Your instincts will tell you, I don't trust this person. I don't know why.
Yes.
Or he looked uncomfortable, or she seemed like she wasn't quite there. So we're watching the body, and we notice within a fraction of a second when something is off. Now here's the good news.
Yes.
You don't need to study body language because you automatically are congruent when you're congruent.
Yes.
In other words, when you're being authentic, your body will do what it's supposed to do. But, it's just like when detectives pull somebody into one of those rooms, one of the ways they know you're lying is they see the body do one thing and they hear the words do another, and they go, okay, mark it down.
Yes.
The third thing is the breath. Now, people don't say he's breathing funny or she's breathing funny, but when, what we often call vocal problems aren't really vocal problems. The problem is I'm not breathing. And you can, if I stop breathing, or if I kind of talk like this, where I just take shallow breaths, you go, he's kind of quiet. And what happens is you'll stop breathing as well. And the problem is not that I'm quiet. The problem is I'm not breathing.
Yes.
When I breathe, you breathe. So the body, the voice, and finally the eyes. Now, I think a lot of people told you got to make eye contact.
Yeah.
You don't have to make eye contact the whole time, but if you're hiding and you're constantly searching down here, or you're shifting your eyes in ways that don't land and allow the listener to see you, then it triggers a distrust. So learning how to use your eyes in a way where you create what we call connected conversations.
Yes.
For all of us, there are moments when we have to look away because we gather our thoughts. That's okay. In fact, it's desirable. You give the listener a break for a minute, but you have to come back.
Yes.
It's not a desire to hide. It's a moment where I gotta think. And if you're thinking visually, you'll tend to look up. If you're thinking kinesthetically, which is feelings, it felt, I don't know, I was a little uneasy. Head will tend to go down. But we saw this beautiful, it was so good. Eyes will go up.
Yes.
Depending on what you're retrieving.
Yes.
Anyway, it's, sort of a technical point, but let people see your eyes. You have to have vocal variety, not just for the sake of sounding pretty, but what the voice does is it helps you articulate the nuance of ideas. If you're trying to hold the listener's attention, there's a musicality to every single idea. There's a music to every sentence.
Interesting.
You don't need to be a trained actor. You don't need to go get voice lessons. People do this naturally, but when we're under pressure, we tend to compress the voice and then we tend to go flat. So let me tell you a little bit about the company and what we do and all of that. We tend to go and you know, that's not my voice. That's my weird voice when I'm feeling nervous and under pressure.
Exactly. You know, one of the questions that popped up on the screen, you know, some people basically are saying, you know, sometimes you've prepared your points of discovery, you go in the meeting, the client seems to have a different timeline for when they want to get through certain things.
Yeah.
Right? And then as a sales professional, you're under pressure. You're trying to essentially kind of push the deal through the steps, right? How do you handle that sort of disconnect between how fast I want to move as a sales professional and how slow perhaps my client wants to move?
Yeah, so how do you manage the experience?
Yeah.
You know, we do a lot of work with politicians, and it's just like this. I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff I want to say, but I've got to listen to you, Ash. You're conducting the interview, so I got to figure out how to address the questions that you're asking, and if I want to expand upon it, I can within reason.
Yeah.
I'm also keeping an eye on you. Okay, enough, Peter. Let's move on to the next question. Listen, you want to have a plan. I want to hit these 3 points. I want to move them through this. But what's happened over the past 25 years is the listening habits of the customer have dramatically changed because of computer technology. Most people are used to listening with a mouse, and I'm speaking sort of metaphorically and realistically. They want to point and click at what they want to know about, and they're used to being in control. People don't want to sit passively. So they go, you know what, I don't need to hear about that. Just move on to the technology. I want to hear more about the technology, or tell me about the benefits. Forget all that stuff. Just tell me the cost.
Yeah.
How much does it cost? And what kind of a deal can you give us?
Exactly.
We all know this. And, you know, what do? It's a judgment call. This is a judgment call. There isn't a single answer to it.
Yes.
We're always managing the experience. In general, your job is to meet the needs of the listener, the intellectual, business, and emotional needs of the listener. But generally, if they say, look, cut to the chase, how much does it cost?
Yes. Yeah.
You can try to reframe the question and say, let me first talk about value, and then let me tell you what the investment's going to be.
Yes.
Which isn't a bad way to go. Or you can say, look, here's what the cost is.
Yes.
And if you'll give me a moment, let's look at the cost in relationship to the value that it brings. They may then give you permission to go back to what you wanted to talk about. But let's face it, no plan survives the CEO. So you got to go in there, especially if you're talking to C-level executives or anybody for that matter, savvy buyer, and they're going to zigzag on you, and you've got to be able to dance with them in the direction that they go in.
Absolutely. And I'd love for you to also, you know, similar to what we did in a few minutes ago, give them a sense also when you work with them on delivery with Stand and Deliver group. I'd love them to get a sense of if I'm not so good in that direction, because you just talked about being present, being able to manage the conversation, and being very conscious of what your original plan is. So typically, what would you do with either a group or an individual when you're trying to kind of really help them get a difference in their delivery skills?
When we work with somebody on their delivery, you know, a whole team or an individual, we start with, what's the brand? What's your brand? How do you want to be known? You know, we worked with a giant investment firm, and we did a lot of work on what is the reputation that you want to have out there. And they were very clear. They wanted to be academic, which was interesting. They wanted to come, a lot of them were former professors, academic, understated, never bragging, and have a quiet certainty, a kind of confidence, but a humble confidence. And they wanted to lead with the science of investing. And you can start to get the picture.
Yes.
So these are not, hey, let me tell you about our great investment. It's more of an intellectual approach. So once we understand how an organization or an individual sees themselves, and they don't always know, so sometimes we have to work with them on identifying what is that unique brand that you want to project. And then secondly, we start to let's look at the narratives or the stories, the themes, the language. How are you going to represent this in terms of the words and the ideas.
Yes.
And then from there, we can start to look at, so who are you? Because you can't make you. You're not going to go out there and play a character. You have to be you.
Yes.
And how do we take who you essentially are as an authentic human being and vitalize that? Just the same way that you work with an athlete, you're taking the essential strengths of the athlete and making them stronger. So we'll work with them on their own presence. And some of it's eliminating bad habits.
Yes.
And some of it is shining up the virtues. What are the virtues this person has? How do we take it to the next level?
Very, very interesting. So you're really coupling the brand of the company that they work for, how they want to be seen, and then come back and look at that person's unique abilities, unique features when they present and speak.
You have to. When I was in show business, when I was in theater and film, we did the same thing. You're working with an actor who's going to play the character, but you're still working with that actor. Let's look at how we can work with this actor and look at her or his strengths as he steps into the shoes of this character. They're always playing some element of themselves in that character. Yeah. It's a little, to some extent true when we sell. You have to be yourself, but it's you in the role of a salesperson representing this product or service to this customer.
Yes, very good point. As you were speaking about this, I also remembered, the work you do around stories. And I think for some people, sometimes if they take the points of discovery, sometimes it might come across as very stilted, we're going to go through point 1, 2, 3, but maybe a story sometimes will act as a different frame. I'd love for you to maybe speak to that from a delivery perspective, what a difference stories actually make in high stakes conversations. And then let's also talk about how can they develop and become good storytellers.
Well, thank you. So stories. Logic, of course, makes people think.
Yeah.
Emotion makes people act. And stories are unique in the sense that they create emotion, they create feeling, they can create stickiness. We tend to remember stories, we tend to forget the facts. But if you can bookend your pitch, in other words, start and finish with some kind of a story, it wraps the whole narrative in a kind of ribbon and puts it in a different drawer in the brain. Yeah. People will remember it.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. And when you work with people to help them develop that area, where do you typically start with them to make sure they get the value of it and then start really developing the skills to deliver stories like that?
Well, whether we're working with an individual or an organization, we start with where do you want to go? That's all, it's the same thing we teach in narrative. What's your outcome? What's your goal? Where do you want to be in 3 years or in 13 years? Where are you going? Where are you going with your leadership? And that's the core theme that we bring to this is where are you leading? And you don't need to have a C-suite title or 4 stars on your shoulder, but what are the ideas that you're bringing into the world? How do you want to make a difference? How do you want to contribute? And we always work from that place of leadership. How are you showing up and what do you stand for? Again, you don't need to be like, I'm going to change the world and fix global warming, but what is it that you're about? Yeah. What are the values and virtues that you really stand for, regardless of what you're selling and what you're about? And what are the sales targets you're after? Are you trying to become, top salesperson or a sales manager, or are you trying to become CEO of the company?
Yeah.
Let's start with the goals and then work backwards like we would with any strategic plan. Sometimes we're working with, I work with everybody from presidential candidates to PhD candidates. I'll work with somebody who's going in for their PhD thesis and they've got to get before the board. I work with everybody. I mean, especially love working with students.
Peter, thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Top 1% Sellers podcast. Give us your suggestions and guest recommendations by emailing us at ash@connectwithash.com. Thank you also for sharing this podcast with your colleagues and social media contacts. To connect with us on LinkedIn, please send a connect request to ash@connectwithash.com. See you at our next episode. Thanks for tuning in.